Time for the Daly Planet Podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello, and welcome to the Daly Planet Podcast, your semi-monthly podcast where we talk about movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, and I'm your host, and I'm joined, as always, by my frequent co-host these days, Michael Grubb. Michael, how's it going?
Oh, hey there, sport.
You've got a new recording setup, sir, and it sounds quite lovely.
Oh, thank you. I'm sort of a professional dungeon master now.
That's right.
And
we had our first D&D game this past weekend.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
Yeah, I've never played over the internet before, so it was an interesting experience, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, technology is good.
Yeah, who needs to see people anymore?
Yeah, I know. It's an unnecessary distraction.
All right, Michael, we are here today to talk about some movies because we haven't had one of these podcasts in a while. I was on a honeymoon, so I took 3 weeks off, and then we were hoping to fit one in before I left, but then I bailed on you, which I apologize. But there have been a ton of summer movies that have come out, and I thought it'd be fun to get together and just and talk about a few of them, the ones that you and I have happened to see since we last talked.
Which is quite a few.
It is. There are some that you haven't seen that I have. Or maybe I'll touch on those rather briefly. Movies like Spider-Man: Homecoming, which I would not expect that to be a movie that you would go out of your way to see.
I'm done with superhero movies, and especially Spider-Man.
Oh,
I was done with Spider-Man. I was done with Spider-Man after like the third Tobey Maguire movie. I haven't seen any of them since.
Well, the two ones with Garfield were terrible. So you made a wise decision.
Yes,
but
I'm sure my most recent decision not to see the new one is equally wise.
See, I disagree. But let's get into some movies that you can talk about first. I wanted to talk first about Dunkirk because that's the big one that's come out. I think the first podcast I ever did was with you and Matt talking about Christopher Nolan because I had a pretty mixed opinion of him, and you, person who hates movies, actually really, really like Christopher Nolan and his movies. So
I do, yeah.
I'm very interested to see what you thought of his Dunkirk.
Well, I would say I was overall pretty whelmed. And say I went into it not really thinking, even though I really like Christopher Nolan, this isn't for me what the typical type of Christopher Nolan movie that makes me like him, which is like the kind of weird imaginative stuff like Inception and The Prestige, which are two of my favorite movies. And Memento had a cool idea. And this one was much more like real and like based on a true story, obviously. It wasn't a biopic, thank God. Like I don't think any of the actual characters were real people, maybe the generals or something. I don't know, maybe you have more information on that than I do. But it was still like a real thing that happened. And so I wasn't like super excited about it, but I saw it today, and it wasn't bad. It was well done. There were a lot of things to appreciate about it, but I think ultimately it will be a pretty forgettable movie for me.
Okay. Yeah. As far as how close it clung to actual history, not very much. I think that there are characters that you could possibly say some of those characters represent. Tom Hardy's character in particular is representative of a lot of fighter pilots that helped out in the Dunkirk evacuation, but I don't think they were trying to channel anyone specific in this. I think the movie takes a very wide tone like that because the movie bends over backwards to not show you any German soldiers. All you see are the British and then a handful of French soldiers. And then the characters themselves are very broad and very thin. These are not in-depth, like super complicated characters. They don't really have any specific defining attribute to them besides I want to live. And I think that's very intentional.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I just saw the movie today, and I can't actually tell you the names of any of the characters.
Yeah, I don't know them either. I have IMDb open right now. So I know them, but I don't know them. Tom Hardy's character's name was Farrier, which did not know that.
Yeah, it was mentioned maybe a couple times.
Yeah.
But it was still like you still cared about the characters though, so it wasn't like a failure of him to make you kind of empathize with the characters. Like you said, I think it was more of an intentional, like these are like representative soldiers or people in different roles in this situation. Yeah,
and the message behind Dunkirk is that sometimes survival by itself can be a victory. So I don't think the movie wanted to point out any specific heroism, rather paint with a really broad brush and say just these three individual groups are representative of everyone that did something at Dunkirk, and they are collectively heroic in that moment.
Like I particularly noticed at the end when Tom Hardy kind of like comes in and shoots down the bomber that's going to kill a bunch of people on shore. Without like any fuel left, that they like didn't build that up as like a super dramatic moment with like, you know, him like recalling his wife or like being like, come on, like and like getting him in the crosshairs, and like it was all pretty muted, and like all of the dog fights, like even when his teammates were getting shot down, it's just like, do you have visual contact on our team leader? Oh, yep, he went down.
Yeah.
And it's a much more like realistic tone. Nothing was like overly dramatized, but you still kind of like felt their victories and stuff, and you felt their frustration, like with the soldier character who kept trying to get away, and like every boat he kept getting on kept getting sunk. And
and of course, the big thing with this movie, and the most Christopher Nolan-y thing, is how the movie plays with time. I guess we should put a spoiler warning out there for people that have not seen the movie somehow. But the movie takes place in three distinct places by land, by sea, by air, with three distinct times of 1 week, 1 day, and then 1 hour for Tom Hardy and his fighter character. So, I mean, Christopher Nolan loves playing with time. You look at Inception and how the time moves in that. You look at Memento, where he loves like basically telling a movie in reverse. So this felt very Christopher Nolan-y, and I think it's clever in that it solves a problem with Dunkirk as a whole, in that the evacuation itself was a very slow, methodical type of thing. How do you transfer like the hopelessness of being trapped on a beach for a week and intercut that with like a fighter pilot's 1 day's worth of heroics, and like it's a very clever way to get around that.
Honestly, though, like if they just never mentioned the time thing, I wouldn't have noticed. Just because it was edited well.
Yeah, well,
I don't know if you felt that
they intersect in very interesting ways. They like you see things that have happened before from a different angle. There is some kind of clever editing where, like, I think with near the end of the movie when Tom Hardy shoots down that plane after he's run out of fuel, that is intercut like almost immediately with Mark Rylance's character making the clever move on the boat to avoid the gunfire from that same plane. So it uses that in clever ways, but it also, to me, it kind of unnecessarily complicates the movie a little bit. Like, explaining this movie to someone is really difficult because you have these three separate timelines and they're all interacting at various times, and it's like it kind of feels like it's cheating to me a little bit because it's using these different timelines to like extend a drama where normal time passage just couldn't.
Yeah. I would say like it was edited well enough that, again, I wouldn't notice. Like, it did put on the little like title cards, like the time, like 1 week, 1 day or whatever. But like I would have just accepted it as normal, like time manipulation. And because they showed multiple scenes from different perspective, Like you were kind of aware that this wasn't just like linearly following along, but everything was still happening in like the right order, such that like it wasn't like a Tarantino, like you're pulling things from the future. It was still like everything was basically in the right order for the different narratives to not be confusing.
Yeah, I was never confused, I don't think. And I think I'm with you. This movie's complicated to me because I think it's beautiful. I think it's so well done. It's such an experience, and I saw it in 70 millimeter IMAX. I'm guessing you did not. You did not have that available to you.
We don't have those in the wilderness.
So it's such a oppressive like experience of a movie. I think this it's not my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, but I think it might be his best, which is, I guess, kind of confusing to say. I think it sounds like so pretentious to say, oh, you got to see this in 70 millimeter IMAX, but I think that's like what he wanted to do. Like this movie shot, I think 80% on IMAX cameras, which had never been done before. So this is an experience movie. This is like what it's meant to do. And I think in that it succeeds.
Yeah, it was a good experience. And another thing I want to point out about it is Hans Zimmer's soundtrack. Hans Zimmer does the music for like all of Christopher Nolan's movies, and I really like him as a composer. And for his other movies, he makes like songs, or musical pieces that can stand alone and that I will listen to or play on the piano or whatever. And in this movie, like the soundtrack is not something I would listen to apart from the movie because it was like so specifically tailored to the movie. Like it was just kind of like a gentle kind of like hum and ticking of clocks and stuff that enhanced the particular scenes that they were in. And I appreciated that Christopher Nolan and Hans Zimmer like worked together to build that in. Like the soundtrack definitely wasn't an afterthought. It was all like very intentional.
Yeah, I totally agree. How did you feel about the performances in the movie? Because I think as flat and kind of broad as the characters are, I really think it is some of the performances that can take those characters and bring that kind of emotionality and pathos to it. Because like what Tom Hardy does with just his eyes in this movie, because his face is covered through, I don't know what Christopher Nolan has with covering up Tom Hardy's face, but he does it a lot. But just like what he expresses with his eyes when spoilers, he's making the decision to keep going, to not turn back, knowing that he's going to run out of fuel, knowing that he's going to either crash and die or have to land in enemy territory. He makes that choice silently, just with his eyes.
See, I think, I mean, Tom Hardy's a good actor, and I think he did a good job in the movie, but I think that was done better through the editing of like showing the fuel gauge and the reserve fuel switch and stuff. I feel like that's what told the story of him making the decision rather than
but he's still there.
His eyes. He's still there, but I would just compliment the editing for the story, because one thing I want to point out about the storytelling in general in the movie is how unimportant any of the dialogue is. Like there's very little dialogue, like especially for the private character on the ground, and also Tom Hardy. But the private character on the ground's in a lot of scenes, and he's mostly silent, and then he never has a conversation with anyone. Certainly, he interacts with a number of people at different points.
Yeah, which is very good, because once again, Christopher Nolan has mixed a movie where his dialogue is too quiet as compared to the score. And there were times in this movie where I just literally could not hear what the characters were saying.
Really?
And that has happened in Interstellar for me now. That has happened here. And I just feel like he always mixes his score just a little too high compared to his dialogue. And I think it's fortunate that it doesn't really matter here.
I didn't notice that, but maybe it's because the dialogue didn't matter.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool that he chose to do that. That's not like something I would even ever think to do in a movie. Well, like I would consider like dialogue to be like a really important part of characterization, but he kind of manages to do that. And like you said, the characters are like shallow, but you still like get them and care about them. And he does that really well without any dialogue.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it almost seems like a response to some of his critics who have said, and I have said, that Christopher Nolan cannot write dialogue that is not exposition, and he tells all of his movies' themes and important things through his characters just talking about them. This is a complaint that I've thrown at him many times, and it almost seems like here he's saying, oh yeah, well fine, I'm not going to have any dialogue. And that's what he did here. And it does work very well.
Yeah, I think he's good at that. And I think he's good at that in his other movies as well, which we've probably argued about on the first Christopher Nolan.
We won't get into all that today.
We do have some other movies to discuss.
Yeah,
I will point out, I think I told you before, but my father's old airplane was the airplane that they used in this movie. He sold it to a movie production company a couple of years ago, and actually all the inside shots of the plane Tom Hardy's in, that's the inside of my dad's old airplane. So that was also cool for me to recognize.
Yeah, so you did recognize it. That was my big question, because I knew that, but I didn't know if it was noticeable.
Yeah. So the canopy and everything.
So when he's writing the amount of fuel left on the console.
My father hasn't seen it yet. I'm going to ask him how much of they changed. I didn't recognize whether that was the same control panel or not.
Gotcha. Well, that's very cool. The only other thing I wanted to talk about before we move on is Harry Styles, because I guess we have to talk about Harry Styles.
Do we?
Well, I mean, this was a big deal. He is a very well-known pop star, and he was in this movie, and he wasn't bad. I didn't notice his performance being a negative on the film, which is pretty good for someone who's trying to transition to acting. I think this was probably a pretty good transition movie for him. He doesn't have to say a lot of dialogue, and he doesn't have too big of a part. So,
right. Yeah, I thought he did fine. From what I read about the movie is he was cast like Christopher Nolan didn't know who he was when he casted him. He tried out with a bunch of other people. Yeah. And he seemed to fit the role pretty well.
Yeah. I just thinking of this movie as a whole, right before we move on, I love that this is a Christopher Nolan movie that, first of all, it's pretty universally loved. I know a lot of people that don't like Christopher Nolan that really loved this movie. I think it's a really great experience. I had a lot of fun with it, and it's funny how it's billed as a war film, and it's really not a war film. It feels weird to say it's a character study, because it's also very thin characters, but it is kind of a character study. It's focusing on these different characters and what they were willing to do.
Yeah, it's sort of an everyman character story for different people who may have been involved. And my closing thought on it would be, even though it's not really the type of movie that I really like, or the types of things in Christopher Nolan movies that I really like, it kind of shows Christopher Nolan's breadth as a director. He's willing to do a lot of different movie types, and he puts a lot of care into each of them, and I think there's a lot to appreciate about it. Yeah,
and I, as the eternal Christopher Nolan negative person, appreciate what he does, and I appreciate his love for film. I appreciate the beauty that he puts in these movies. I appreciate that he's one of the very few directors who has found a way to do what he wants within the studio system. He's one of the few directors that can get away with spending hundreds of millions of dollars on things that he would call passion projects. And it's really wonderful. And I look forward to his next. I'm always going to see the next Christopher Nolan film, and it's going to be on film. You always know it's going to be on film. Did you hear the crazy story with the IMAX camera? What happened?
No. So
that scene when one of the planes crashes into the water, that was point of view from the plane, they put an IMAX camera in that plane, a super, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment into the plane, and crashed it. And they were expecting that the thing would float for a while and they could get the camera out. Well, it didn't. The plane sunk immediately, and along with the IMAX camera, and they were able to get the plane out of there. They were able to pull the camera out. They thought that the film was ruined because it had been underwater for hours. But they contacted someone in California who knew some technique about if the film got wet, if you keep it wet and then you develop it wet, it will come out fine. So they shipped the film from France to California, keeping it damp the entire time, and they developed it, and that's the shot that's in the movie. So it's pretty incredible the stuff that he's doing to get these shots.
It's a pretty interesting story.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for Dunkirk. If you have not seen it yet, I like that. There's not every film that I think needs to be seen in theaters. I think Dunkirk's one of those movies. I think watching it at home on your TV or on your phone or something would be doing a disservice to this film. So see it in the theater. And let's move on to our next movie, which is War for the Planet of the Apes. I saw this one only last week because it came out while I was away. So I've been slowly catching up on all the movies I missed while I was out of the country. Michael, what did you think of the third movie in the new Apes trilogy?
I liked it. Yeah, it was like right off the bat there was, and I've liked the whole trilogy, I would say, so far. But like right off the bat in this one, there was a lot of like cool touches that you notice, like the writing on the back of the soldiers' helmets, and you're kind of immediately immersed in this world. You care about Caesar, who's a pretty good character here, and I like his little band of primate adventurers. I'm kind of a sucker for like little band of adventure movies for some reason. So I liked that. I liked that they got like a pet human, which kind of inverts the normal thing, and is kind of setting up the whenever the Planet of the Apes actually reaches the original Planet of the Apes storyline.
Yeah, and it's a very clever reference back to it too, because the character's name is Nova, and Nova is the female that leaves with Charlton Heston in the first movie. So obviously the timelines are not going to link up perfectly because that was thousands of years in the future, but it is a little nod to the original series, and there's a lot of those sprinkled throughout all these films.
Yeah, and I really liked Woody Harrelson's character. I thought he was a pretty believable villain.
Yeah, I agree.
That you could relate to, and you kind of found his end a little bit tragic. And it was cool the way they did it, setting up that doll that they had since the beginning, and you didn't know it was going to be important, but it was. So I liked it. I thought it was pretty well done.
Yeah, were you surprised at the movie it ended up being? Because like the title of the movie is War for the Planet of the Apes, and there's a battle scene at the beginning, and then it moves into this, like you said, kind of adventure movie, which shifts into like a prisoner of war movie. It was not what I was expecting, but was great nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought the ending kind of wasn't set up great, because it was like the war between humans and humans, and there was just, like, spoiler, there's just kind of like like for some reason, like the whole, like, whatever third party human army marched into this canyon after like the whole place had been blown up, and then they just all got buried in an avalanche, and it seemed really weird and random. I agree that the end of the third act of the film feels a little rushed. Like, it's like, okay, we're here now, we have to finish the movie. So here, big war, our characters get away, end of movie. And there's a little bit like Deus Ex Machina sort of solution. Yeah. I mean, the monkeys had their own escape plan, but it kind of got like thwarted by the fact that there's this really convenient attack on the humans as well. Which I feel like kind of detracted from the like victory of their escape plan, which was like pretty well planned out and set up.
Yeah, I agree. But it's like that's a nitpick in what is a fabulous film for me. I mean, Andy Serkis here is incredible. Woody Harrelson, you've already mentioned, is good. I like Steve Zahn's kind of comedic bad ape character. I enjoyed him a lot too. I think he brought a little levity to it, which this is kind of a very dour, serious film, so levity helps. I thought he was well inserted. The thing, if I had, like, you're kind of forced to compare this to the movies that came before it, and the thing that I liked so much about Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the one before that, was that the movie kind of bent over backwards to show that in this conflict between humans and apes, there are good people on both sides and there are bad people on both sides.
Right.
And like you were kind of on Team Ape because Caesar's your protagonist, but there were really people on both sides struggling to find a way to end this conflict in peace. And the tragedy of the film is that is impossible and unavoidable, and eventually there's going to be conflict and there's going to be war, and that was what led to this film. This movie kind of was more, the only humans that were good were the ones that had basically reverted to primate form, that were basically quote unquote savages. Every other human in this movie was kind of terrible. And
yeah, especially the crossbow character, who they were kind of setting up to have been like, Caesar saved me, I'm gonna at some point realize that I should help them, and then he doesn't. So the point with that, I guess, was just that humans.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right, and that's kind of where I was going, was that is clearly telegraphed as like a setup. Caesar spares his life. We see him give Caesar like these conflicted glances throughout the film, as if he's really wondering, am I a baddie? Am I a good guy? Or am I on the wrong side of this conflict?
Exactly.
And
why are there skulls on our uniforms? Are we the baddies?
Right. Exactly. And then the movie literally subverts that, because he doubles down, and the ape, the traitor ape, who the whole time you thought was basically irredeemable, is the only one that redeems himself.
Yeah. So I figured he was going to redeem himself.
Yeah. I mean, it's a movie, but
yeah.
I think that's a very clear message here that all the credit to Matt Reeves that he constructed a movie and two movies now where basically the humans are the bad guys, and these are big blockbuster budget films where we're the pieces of shit, awful people, and we're rooting for the animals.
Yeah, well, and on a related note, one of the things I want to point out that is pretty hard, but has been made really natural in the last two movies, especially, is characterizing these non-human characters, because you can't rely on actors' facial expressions and tones of voice even. They've just constructed all these really well-defined characters, like the orangutan, just by the way it does sign language in a different way than all the other apes do sign language.
Right.
And some apes can kind of talk, and they're all just really well characterized, even though they're fully CGI. There's you can't, they don't have human facial expressions really. In the eyes, you can communicate some stuff. It's just it's not as easy to do as he makes it look.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because the big conversation around this movie right now is, should Andy Serkis be nominated for an acting Oscar for this? Because facial motion capture has gotten so good now that Caesar is mostly Andy Serkis's face. I mean, yes, there's a lot of work that goes on underneath it. There are countless hours of computer animators doing wonderful things, but he is doing the performance as well, and they are taking his facial tics and his eye movement and his performance, and then creating this computer generated character with it. So, I mean, do you think that we've reached the point now where these people that are doing the voices and the motion capture for these characters should be nominated for an acting award?
Well, if Leonardo DiCaprio can be nominated for whatever that movie was, The Revenant.
Yeah.
Then absolutely.
Yeah, because I think the argument gets to be, when is this stopped being different from makeup, right? That we have all these movies where characters undergo these huge transformations and to become the character they're portraying, and they're called Oscar bait, and they're done through makeup or prosthetics or what have you. When does this become just another form of that, although albeit a much more technological version? And I agree. I think Andy Serkis is an incredible actor. He's kind of become this motion capture guy, and he's if you listen to an interview him talk about this movie, I don't think he's trying to self-aggrandize. He's not saying, look how awesome I am. He's just saying that I think the people doing this, the people that I've helped train to do this, and the actors out there doing these things need to be given some more credit. than they've been traditionally given.
Yeah, he definitely deserves some recognition of some sort, regardless of what your philosophy is on acting awards. And it is a very thankless job, because he's done all of these motion capture, like Gollum and stuff, motion capture stuff. It's really pretty thankless,
right?
Because you're not ever shown on screen, and you're just digitally removed basically and replaced with a CGI thing. And he definitely deserves some recognition.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Matt Reeves' War for the Planet of the Apes. I think Matt has said that he's done with these movies. I think Matt Reeves has the Batman movie coming up that he's now taken over for Ben Affleck for. I don't know what the plan is with these films. I don't know if this one is performing well enough, but would you want to see more films in this universe, or do you think this nice, like, tight trilogy is good enough?
I think I wouldn't mind seeing more. I mean, it doesn't. I thought they were gonna like lead up to, like just before the original Planet of the Apes movie, when the like apes like actually take over, and maybe they implied that maybe like that was all of the humans dying in that avalanche. But yeah, like with major spoiler, Caesar's death, it does seem like a good place to end. I mean, you'd pretty much have to make new characters. Like I would really want to see the same characters, like the orangutan and stuff, and continued, because they were just kind of like a part of Caesar's kind of group. And I don't really care what happens to them next.
I completely agree.
Even though I liked them.
I completely agree. This has always been Caesar's trilogy. These are his movies. I don't think you can continue on in the same way without him. I think you can, show passage of time and tell another movie about, hundreds of years later in the world. But
and also, like, what do they have left to say? Because like the first movie was more about, humans and what their relationship is with like a couple really intelligent primates that are basically human. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you treat those? And the second movie was, like you talked about, like this is now a civilization and there's like good and bad people on each side, and how do they reconcile with the humans? And this movie was about like the humans are dying, and also they're, making some really bad choices that kind of make it so it's impossible for them to get along with the apes. Yeah. So what is there left to explore in a science fiction sense?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and this movie very clearly leaves it there that, even if that's not all the humans that were destroyed in that avalanche at the end, the disease that is affecting them is spreading. It seems like it's going to spread. There doesn't seem to be a way to reliably stop it. So apes are going to continue to get smarter. Humans are going to continue to get dumber, and we end the trilogy where it is a Planet of the Apes. This is their world now. So yeah, what else can you do in that world? I agree. Man, there's so much more. Like, I would love to talk about this film. Like, there's a lot of subtle stuff with like Caesar's guilt over having to kill Koba and breaking his ape does not kill ape thing, and how that translates into this movie, and how like Woody Harrelson's character is like a Koba of the humans, like, and how closely that relates to each other, where like it just, oh man. But I don't want to take an hour to talk about this movie, but maybe another time. But there's a lot of really complicated stuff going on here. Again, this is another thing that has war in the title, that is a war movie, but is really more of a character study. Yeah,
which is just preferable, because it would have been really boring if it was just like a big battle.
Right, I agree. All right, so let's move on to the last movie we're going to talk about. Let's talk about Baby Driver. I think this is the one we have the most to say about. Spoilers, I love this movie. Edgar Wright's one of my favorite directors. I've never really had a movie of his I didn't like. I heard that this was very different from the Edgar Wright type movies, but still great. And I was not disappointed at all. It's been a while since I've seen this, so I'm going to be talking a lot from memory. I think you've seen it twice, so you probably have a little more.
I have seen it twice,
pull from here. But Michael, what did you like about Baby Driver?
I liked all of the things, but I think the thing I liked the most is just how purposeful everything was. Like, every line of dialogue was like not like throwaway. Like it had a purpose and a meaning. Every choice of song in the soundtrack, which like they're not songs that I would listen to on their own, but they were like perfectly chosen for like the mood and the tone of the scene. The characters were really well, like they were all exaggerations. They're like really exaggerated characters, like theatrical characters, but they were just like done so perfectly with like their super purposeful dialogue and stuff that you found them really appealing and you could relate to them even though they weren't realistic characters. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just like I just like everything had a purpose. Like this was a really detailed movie, and that's what I really appreciated about it.
Yeah, and that's not surprising considering how long Edgar Wright was working on this movie. This was the movie that he started after Ant-Man collapsed around him and he left the project. So I think really wanted to do something that he wanted to do, and like very little studio interferences. He wanted to make his movie, and this is the result of it. And you're absolutely right that this is the thing that upsets me the most when I hear people talk about this movie is when they say it's thin or it's not really saying a lot. And I don't think that's true at all. I think the movie is actually doing a lot of stuff, and it's playing. Yes, it's playing in this kind of crime world, and like I think Edgar Wright mentions the movie The Driver very specifically because he's aping off these things. But like when Edgar Wright plays in every other genre, he's always doing something else with it. In Shaun of the Dead, he was not just making a zombie movie. In Hot Fuzz, he was not just making an action movie. And he's not just making a car movie here. Like, that's not what this movie is. So it really annoys me when people say that's just what it is.
Yeah, I mean, every movie doesn't have to be like a dark, gritty, realistic like movie. This movie was light in a lot of ways, but not trivial, which is when light movies are bad. Yeah, there's a very dark undertone to this movie. Actually, it is very light. It is very fun. But like, what's going on with Baby and his character throughout the movie? He's basically in a state of arrested development. I mean, there's a reason why the character's name is Baby. He experienced trauma as a kid, and he has never really grown on from it. And he wears sunglasses and puts headphones in his ears to basically hide from the world and live in this state of perpetual arrested development where he has surrogate parents all over the place. Kevin Spacey's character, he's got his actual foster dad, and he's just kind of living in this fantasy world. And the movie is almost him growing up, and it's really, really fabulously well done. Yeah, definitely. I like the little touches that they do. Like, you see him like clipping through channels with his actual foster dad near the beginning of the film. And what I recognized a few of them the first time I saw it, but actually like every single thing that was on the television that they flipped through are lines that he just like parroted later because he's just kind of like pretending to like be a normal human or whatever. He doesn't quite know how to act. So like the Fight Club line, they specifically pointed out the Monsters Inc. line. But like everything was repeated, and they don't make like a big deal of it. It's just like a little hidden thing.
And that's Edgar Wright, right? Like, he does that. Like, the attention to detail in his films are so incredible, and there's so much going on, and only half the time the movie actually takes the time to point it out to you that all this stuff is going on. And you're right. You're absolutely right. That's here too. And the thing that was most surprising to me was Ansel Elgort, because I was pretty convinced. I'm not the biggest fan of this kid. And when I heard he was like trying to do this Steve McQueen type character, I was like, that's not going to work. But that's the brilliance of this movie, is that Ansel Elgort is playing a person who's trying to do a Steve McQueen type character. He's pretending to be this person that he's very clearly not. And you can see that in the performance, and Elgort does such a great job with that, because like it's so kind of ridiculous and it's almost campy in a few places, like when he's walking down the street singing and dancing, and it kind of almost shifts into a musical, and it's just like, it's so crazy. But that's how Baby sees the world, and it's goofy and it's silly, but you can't dismiss it because it's definitely saying something.
That was great. I don't know why it was so great exactly, that like everything he was doing was like lining up with background objects, and then like his walk back from the coffee place when like there's sirens, and then you can see like his nervousness and him like looking over his shoulder and like running into people and stuff. That was a great, like it was that may have even been like one long extended shot. The camera is definitely like following him, but anyway, it was really well communicated. Ansel Elgort in real life seems like a little snot, but yeah, you're right. He was perfect for this movie, and it's similar to like how the movie Drive made me think that Ryan Gosling was a good actor, but it was just like a good role for him.
I think Ryan Gosling's a good actor.
Well, maybe. I mean, he seems like a real snot in real life too, actually. But
I'm sure he is.
But he's had a couple good roles, but like sometimes it just doesn't work. Like in Only God Forgives, I think his character kind of falls flat because he's like still kind of doing the Drive thing, but it's not a Drive movie, so it doesn't have the same sort of like interestingness.
We should do a podcast on that movie because I adore that movie, and I'm one of the few.
Only God Forgives.
Yeah, I love that movie so much. It's so crazy. I love it. It's been too long since I've seen it, so I can't talk about it super intelligently. But yeah,
but it's the same sort of deal like with Drive in this movie. Not because cars are involved, but just because like you find the main character really interesting because he's like kind of not really sure how to be a person and like interact with. And they have the same kind of like normal female character that he ends up being the romantic interest, but that's not the point. It's just that like that's a normal person, and the main character is like, you know, trying to interact with them.
Yeah, so I'm interested in your opinion on that because I've heard a lot of the complaints thrown against this movie was that Lily James' Deborah character, the romantic interest in the movie, was not believable as a human being at all. She was kind of flat and not really written at all.
I wouldn't say flat. I mean, if she just appeared in like a normal movie that was going for like a super realistic tone, she would seem like she was acting poorly. But like all of her dialogue was chosen purposefully again, like I said. And so, and so I think it worked really well. And with like her, like doing the singing and like, Baby, like, you know, recording the singing and stuff. And, it was all, I don't know if symbolic is the right word, but, it was all purposeful.
I think it's reflective of the fantastical nature of the way that Baby sees the world, in that their romance is almost like a fairy tale.
Exactly.
And I think that's very, very intentional because that's like he has this view of the world that is not real. And the movie almost explicitly tells you that when he has these images of the two of them in like 50s garb, just these completely unbelievable images where he is not seeing the world as it is. And the part of this movie is him realizing what the world is, and him realizing that being a criminal has consequences, and you can't play in this criminal game and pretend like you're above it all.
If the complaint is like you wouldn't buy that these two people would like form an everlasting love from their short time together, then yeah, that's absolutely right. But this is kind of like a Tarantino, like exaggerated thing, like with you know, the Nazi character in Inglourious Basterds with the massive pipe. I mean, that character's not going to have a massive pipe in real life, but it's just like it's an exaggerated storytelling device, or not even storytelling device, but you know, character device or whatever. And that's the same exaggerated stuff that's going on with all the characters in this movie.
Absolutely. I mean, like, we haven't even talked about them, but John Hamm's character,
great.
Kevin Spacey's character, and even why am I blanking on his name? This is embarrassing.
Jamie Foxx.
There you go. Jamie Foxx's character is so good, but they're you're absolutely right that they're above a level of realism. These are not normal human beings. These are caricatures almost.
Right. And it works because they're all caricatures.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so like I love that the film plays with these caricatures, and then I love that the film subverts our expectation. I love that John Hamm's, who's literally named Buddy, is the character that you think is the only one throughout the entire movie that's nice to Baby,
right? But
ends up being the one that's like actually bad at the end.
The villain, yeah.
Like, literally, like it's so like, and if you look into that, if you try to like, you can see like the other characters are trying to force him to grow up, but maybe John Hamm's character, by like placating his behavior, is kind of like allowing him to stay in that perpetual state of being a baby,
which he kind of is as well, not being a baby, but being in like a fantasy world, because it's kind of implied. I don't think he admits it, but Bats, Jamie Foxx's character, kind of like guesses his backstory, which is that he's like a Wall Street guy who like does this on the weekends to like escape from his life.
Yeah, and they're doing like a Bonnie and Clyde type thing, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that they're living in their own fantasy world. And of course, so he's going to be the bad guy. Whereas you could argue that Jamie Foxx's character, even if he is a character, even if he's outlandish, is like the most realistically a criminal in this thing, because he's just a crazy person.
He knows who he is. Well, he's not even a crazy person. He's just like, well, what do you think we're doing, guys? We're criminals. Like, why wouldn't we kill these people and all of this stuff?
Right.
He's not like playing a game.
Yeah. So what did you think, obviously spoilers here, but what did you think of the end of the film? Because I was listening to this podcast that drove me crazy, because they were talking about how they wished the movie just had the two of them drive off into the sunset together. And I was like, you would miss the entire point of the film, because to me, the point where he decides to stop running, the point where he decides to stop living in this fantasy, and he finally turns himself in and gives up and accepts the consequences for the decisions he's made, is this baby growing up into a man. And I think that's like the conceit of the film. And I don't understand how you could ever hate that. That was shocking to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have probably as strong of opinions as you about it. I can see them just driving away being a okay ending to the movie, but I liked the one that they had for all the reasons that you said. It wasn't obvious to me. Like, I was thinking about this while the ending was approaching, like while all the climactic stuff with Buddy was happening. I was like, I wonder what the right ending to this movie is and what the ending is going to be. Because there are some movies going along where there's kind of like one correct way the movie can end and not feel wrong.
You're right.
But I didn't really, I couldn't really identify what that correct ending was until it happened, and I still don't know if it was like, oh, that was a really good ending, or if it was just like, well, the ending definitely worked, and it worked thematically, and it worked on an emotional level, especially with kind of the fantasy at the end where you're slightly unclear whether he's like finally getting out and she actually waited for him, or this is just more of him imagining stuff.
See, I thought that was the destruction of the fantasy, in that we see him see her in that fantasy world, and then it fades from that black and white to color, which is to me symbolizing that we've moved away from the fantasy and now he's just in real life. And accompanying that is, for the first time, we learn what his real name is, which literally signifies him stopping being Baby and starting being the person that he is. That's how I read it, at least.
Yeah, well, yeah, interesting. Yeah, because I was more leaning toward that it was just another thing he was imagining after reading the letter, because he was supposed to spend, I don't remember how many years in jail, but they like certainly hadn't aged at all by the ending. So I don't know if it was real or not, or if it was supposed to be, or if it's supposed to be ambiguous. It really doesn't matter. No, I don't
think it does, and I think your interpretation works for the film just as well as mine does. And I think that's the cool thing about the movie. And I think that's what has led us to talk about this movie more than the other two we've talked about. It's just that there's so much here. And it was fun.
in a way that I would never use to describe like a Marvel movie, because I don't find them fun. I find them like trivial. But like every scene was really enjoyable in this movie, in a combination of like just appreciating all of the things that were done in the scene on purpose to like evoke certain feelings or reactions, and just like the characters, like enjoying like the great exaggeratedness of the characters, or like what the characters were doing.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was able to see it twice and still, you know, enjoy it just as much.
Yeah, I mean, this is some of the best shot car chases I've seen, which is kind of incredible because Edgar Wright, like, as much as I loved his action in Hot Fuzz, it was definitely action that was like specifically just trying to satirize action scenes. But this is just really good action. Like, it's just very well done. It has, and I think marrying it to music gave it this kind of relentless rhythm and pace that just makes it fun to watch.
Yeah, it was great. And it was also great that he had his iPod broken at the end. Right. Because as his world is kind of falling apart, like, you don't have the music to accompany it, and it seems more real and scary. Yeah, yeah.
Fun fact, apparently Edgar Wright, like, still uses an iPod. Like, he has not shifted away from an iPod, which Apple doesn't even make iPods anymore, so.
Oh, interesting. I've never owned an iPod or any music device. I guess people use their phones these days.
Yeah. What do you listen to music on?
The internet.
What about when you're driving?
Oh, I don't listen to music while I'm driving.
Wow. What do you do?
It's my thinking time.
Okay.
So just like, I come up with all my good ideas while I'm driving. You need something that like distract, like there's like periods of like pure focus on like problems or ideas, and then you need like a sleep period or like a period where you're like driving or taking a shower or something. So I find it a valuable silence time.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. All right. Michael, I think did you want to say anything else about Baby Driver?
I think probably stated all of the things. I mean, there's a lot of details, but I think we've probably talked about all the main ideas.
Yeah. I think this is going to be a movie that it's well regarded right now, but as time goes on, I think this is going to be a movie that stays in the conversation and will continue to be talked about years from now. And one of those movies that just becomes part of culture.
Yeah, at least like
film culture.
Film thing, yeah, because like Drive, I feel like Drive has like a certain committed following right now, but it's not like a mainstream movie that everyone's heard of.
Yeah.
I think this kind of fills the same niche where, yeah.
All right, so that's Baby Driver. So that's, I think, Michael, the only 3 movies that we've both seen, unless you've seen anything else in between the last time you and I talked, which was, I think, Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I think that's all I've seen in the theater.
Okay. Well, I saw Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets last night, so I can talk to you about that very briefly.
Okay.
Because there's not a lot to say. It is terrible. It's so weird because I like Luc Besson a lot. I like The Fifth Element. I enjoy that film very much.
Yeah, and Leon the Professional.
Yeah, and this movie, like, there are parts of it that are just so Besson, and like when the movie zooms out and you see the world, it is beautiful. It is like fantastic. It is like, you're so curious as to what all these different things are, and you're in. But anytime the movie zooms in on your 2 main characters, on Dane DeHaan as Valerian, and Cara I don't even know how to say her name, as Laureline, his co-star, it's awful. The dialogue is some of the worst dialogue I've ever seen. The movie hinges on the romantic chemistry between these 2 characters, of which there is none. Like, I thought from the previews that they were brother and sister, and they kind of look similar. So it kind of makes it seem like they're brother and sister, and I could never get over that. The storyline is bonkers and ridiculous. The acting is like, it's hard to blame them with the dialogue that they're forcing these characters to say, but it's just a mess of a movie. And I really wanted to like it. Like, I really wanted to be this to be like a new Fifth Element that 20 years from now we'll remember fondly. But it's just not. It's just not. It's not a good movie.
Yeah, it seemed to me from the trailers and everything, like there's this one weird type of like fantasy space movie, which is really lazy and bad. Like the one with Mila Kunis.
Yeah,
do you remember?
The Wachowski film.
Was it kind of the same vibe?
Yes and no. See, the thing about I know where you're going, and I almost disagree. I don't think this movie's lazy, and I don't think that movie was lazy either. I just think, I think it's almost the opposite. It's almost that they were trying so hard for something that they missed, like, the fundamentals.
I think there's something weird about these movies that are not science fiction at all, because they're space worlds you can never buy. They're like super sterile, and there's just like lights everywhere for some reason. There's just like this idea, this like archetype of like space world that you use in stories sometimes to communicate like a future space, and it just like never feels right. It's
science fantasy. I mean, that's like, there's no science fiction involved at all.
Right. And you can have good science fantasy, but it's just like there's just this what I would call like lazy future vision, which is like, oh, we need a space colony or something, so let's just make it really smooth and have lots of lights on it, and like everything's super clean, and it doesn't feel like a place.
Yeah, see, I don't think that's this movie at all. And I know you haven't seen it, but like there is so much detail here, and it's almost the point that you're like you're really like, why? Because there's a scene where Dane DeHaan is running through. So the whole idea is that the City of 1,000 Planets is basically a space station called Alpha, which has just over the millennium just attracted people from every single planet in the galaxy. And so there are literally 1,000 different peoples represented here, and it's showing how they all live and how they link together. And anyway, there's a scene where he's running through it and basically running through walls, and you get snippets of these cultures that like are so very like, it's obviously someone sat down and like defined who these people are, what they do, why they do it, and an animator spent thousands of hours animating all this stuff, but you see it for like a fraction of a second and then it's gone. And it's like so much time spent on these little minute details that I guess if they worked collectively, they would help make a world feel real. But it's just like so little attention to the basics of what the story is and how to write dialogue that makes it seem like they're human beings talking and not terrible robots that have no chemistry. It's just, oh man, I like, you don't understand how much I wanted to like this movie. I really, really did.
That's too bad that it ended up failing.
Yeah. So I could talk about Spider-Man Homecoming a little more, but I feel like that movie's kind of been talked to death. I liked it. Spider-Man 2 is my favorite superhero movie ever, so it's not as good as that to me, but it's fine. That's kind of where I'm landing on a lot of these Marvel movies lately. It's just, it's fine.
Yeah. Like, I mean, like what story are they trying to tell with Spider-Man now? Like they've already done several Spider-Man origins and way more Spider-Man movies. It is not an origin story. It is very much, I actually think what they did here was smart, because it's Spider-Man coming back from being involved in Civil War and wanting to be an Avenger, wanting to step up to the big leagues, and just not being ready for it at all. And it's kind of dealing with the fact that he is a kid and he is like having these problems of a teenager and wanting to be this big league, wanting to rush to adulthood when he's just not there yet. And it also has, you might like the movie because it has one of the best villains in the MCU I've seen. Michael Keaton's Vulture is great. He is defined. He has a purpose, and it's not just I'm a bad guy. They've really gotten around the main problem of Marvel movies to me, which is that their villains are so flat and uninteresting. Vulture is the most interesting character in this movie, and how they weave him and Peter Parker and him and Spider-Man's interactions around each other is the best part of the film. So, okay. You might want to give it a shot when it comes to video or something. I know you won't go. I know you won't pay to go see it in the theater, but but yeah, I'm glad they were able to make a good villain Because that's definitely one of my problems with all superhero movies is just the manufactured conflict.
Right.
And sometimes they try really hard to give the villain like a believable motivation, but they just never do.
Yeah. Well, without spoiling it, they do. It's really fantastic. So
cool.
That's Spider-Man: Homecoming. It is still playing. It is doing well. It's not doing great. This is not going to be $1 billion movie. The Spider-Man, I guess, like, it's such a popular character, but you're absolutely right that there have just been too many movies. Like the two middle ones, The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, really hurt the public's perception of Spider-Man, and I just don't think people want to be bothered to see it. But I mean, it's still doing quite well.
Yeah, I mean, reboots are really popular these days, or at least safe. But I think even like the casual moviegoer is starting to get annoyed at 3 reboots. in 17 years or whatever. And
like, I know, and you know, that the big thing about this movie is now that he's part of the Marvel universe again. But the casual moviegoer doesn't know what that means, and they just think, oh, here's another Spider-Man movie.
Right.
All right, so that's it. There's still so many movies I haven't seen. I haven't seen A Ghost Story, which I really want to see. I think you'd like that film a lot too, based on what I've heard about it. But it's probably not playing where you live, unfortunately.
Yeah, I may have seen the trailer to that movie.
It's the one where Casey Affleck is dressed up as a ghost.
Oh,
he's wearing a white sheet the entire movie.
Oh, okay. It sounds interesting.
Yeah. And then I haven't seen Atomic Blonde, which is like John Wick, but a girl. I was supposed to see that this weekend, but I haven't seen that yet. But
I don't really care about that. That looks like it's going to be bad.
But we're moving. Next week, we're doing Dark Tower, which is huge for me because I am obsessed with the Dark Tower books. So I don't think you've ever read those, have you? So this is probably not something that's very interesting to you. So maybe I won't get to have you on the podcast to talk about Dark Tower, but I'm definitely going to do it because I'm obsessed with that series, and the movie's probably going to be bad. But
oh yeah, definitely.
Stop it! No, I have faith.
It doesn't even look good from the trailers.
It doesn't. Like, I like the casting a lot, but every time I see Roland like do reloading his 6-shooter with in the air, I just like roll my eyes. It's stupid.
Yeah, it looks pretty corny.
But yeah, so I will be back next week. You might be with me, maybe not, Michael, but we'll come back at some point to talk about some more movies or anything else. Thanks so much for coming, Michael. This is kind of a special episode where we didn't do our normal news and what we've been watching because we had so many movies to talk about. So thanks for jumping on here with me. Yeah,
no problem. Always happy to discuss movies, and actually there were several good movies to discuss this time.
And for those listening that haven't heard Michael before, for him to say that means something. So you can find this podcast on Twitter at Daly Planet Films or www.dalyplanetfilms.com. That's where you can see all the writing, criticism, TV, other podcasts we do. All that stuff is there. You can follow me on Twitter at ScottDaly85. That's DALY. Michael does not have a Twitter because he doesn't like technology. But just follow me. It'll be fine.
Off the grid.
Off the grid. That's what we say every time. But yeah, thanks.
Still off the grid.
Thanks again, Michael. And for the rest of you, we will see you next week.
The podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next Friday.